the use of the virus as a cover story for crimes committed by corporations, governments, foundations with big money, past crimes, present crimes, planned future crimes. These are the crimes that are all being covered up by saying, none of that is it. We have to focus on the virus is causing all of this destruction.
It's my pleasure today to be speaking with the venerable investigative journalist, Jon Rappoport. Jon has appeared on all forms of media since the 1980s and wrote his first book, AIDS Inc., Exposing the AIDS Industry in 1988. He's also investigated Big Pharma and Big Chemical, as well as the various cabals that run the world. In 2001, when the internet as we know it was just emerging, Jon started his now famous site, nomorefakenews.com. We first heard of Jon in early 2020 when our investigations into the alleged pandemic began. For Jon was the first one in the world to point out that the whole thing was a fraud because there was no virus. Well, Jon, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you today.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Jon, you are a seasoned virology investigator, and I'm not talking just about with SARS-CoV-2, but about viruses in general. Can you tell us what started you off on this path?
Well, it was the issue of AIDS and HIV. So that would go back to 1986. I had been working for 4 years or so as a reporter, freelance, doing articles for mainly LA Weekly in Los Angeles. I got interested in the whole issue of HIV and AIDS. I went into this with no prior knowledge about it. I knew logic. I knew what evidence looked like, and I knew what it didn't look like. I wasn't a scientist. I wasn't a doctor. I was a reporter. So I just began talking to people. And right away, I found a doctor who said, well, HIV is actually some kind of a hybrid of different animal viruses. And you know, there was a huge spread of opinion at the time, if you wanted to look far enough afield and see what different people were thinking. So I assumed automatically that HIV existed. It was the cause of AIDS. AIDS was a syndrome marked by the collapse of the immune system. But then the further that I investigated, and I started writing a book in 1987, AIDS Inc. That's when I came upon Peter Duesberg and his paper in the journal Cancer Research, March 1, 1987, a renowned biologist in America and worldwide who said HIV is a very bad candidate for the cause of AIDS. So fast forward to maybe 1991, 92, my book came out in 1988. I then became aware of the Perth group in Australia, Elaine Papadopoulos, and her contention that HIV was never isolated. And I read an interview by Christine Johnson with her, Los Angeles freelance journalist, and I was very impressed. And then I began talking to more people, more scientists, and that's when I thought, well, this goes much deeper than I thought it did. My conclusion in the book was HIV is not the cause of AIDS. AIDS is not one thing. AIDS is a number of different immune suppressing situations, conditions in different groups of people, and ultimately in each individual person who's so affected. AIDS is a misnomer. It's an umbrella term that deceives people into thinking that all these different people have the same problem or the same root cause. These were a lot of the conclusions that I came to in my book. But then I saw, wait a minute, this whole thing is completely insane. because there's no reason to assume HIV exists at all. So that's how I got into this.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there wasn't a specific precipitant for you. It was just this interest in the HIV/AIDS idea, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, if they didn't ever isolated HIV, what about other viruses? And how do they supposedly isolate and discover these things? But it wasn't really until a couple of years ago that I got a hold on the idea of there's a soup they make in the lab and it's got all these things in it, plus a sample from a patient. And they're claiming they're isolating the virus in the sample, but they never are. Wow.
Yeah.
Then it was like, okay, well, we're living in a completely insane world.
As you said, you wrote for and appeared on some mainstream platforms up to the 1990s, but after that you became independent and you stated that my research was not friendly to the conventional media. Were there any major incidents at that time that made that change for you? And perhaps could you also talk about any major attacks made against you as you flew over some big targets?
I could publish, say, one story in a newspaper that questioned HIV as the cause of AIDS, but no follow-up. If I went back to the same paper and said, well, I've got more here, this is a big issue we're talking about here. Now, we're not interested in anything else. We already covered it. You wrote the story. What else do you want? You know, so, well, what I want to do is get to the bottom of all of this. That just didn't register. It was like talking to somebody who didn't understand what I was saying. Get to the bottom of what, you know. So eventually I just said, screw it. You know, I'm not going to do this anymore. There were other factors too, but that just turned me away from even the alternative press at the time. 1987, 88, 90, 92. Even then, the alternative press didn't work for me anymore. So I just said, bye.
Were there any other areas that really you found were, I like to call them landmines, that you cross over within your own platform?
If I said, I want to investigate groups like Council on Foreign Relations in America, British Roundtable, Rockefeller Empire, because I'm interested in who's running things, really running things. That did not go over. Nobody was interested in that.
When did you start asking those sorts of questions? When did you know about those the globalist organizations?
It started in late 80s. It was a gradual process. Late 1980s, but in 1994, I ran for a seat in the US Congress from Los Angeles, District 29. And that's when a lot of things began to coalesce around that for me. It was like, okay, well, I want to get to these bigger issues. If I can win a congressional seat and I go to Washington, now I've got a podium, a platform from which to speak. And I can try to drive everybody crazy. That would have been my goal, because I could see that Washington, D.C. was a monster in terms of, you know, just the size of the federal government, the bureaucracies and the agencies and the people that are embedded for life in these agencies that never change no matter who's elected and all of that. So I thought the best thing I can do if I win is create a major disturbance, really stick pins in these people. And I had a couple of plans, you know. I said to the people who were helping me in my campaign, I said, if we win, we're going to rent big trucks in Washington, D.C. with big signs on the trucks that say, corrupt congressman of the week. Have a name of a congressman, and then in one column, we're going to have where he gets his campaign and other contributions from corporations, and on the other hand, the bills that he votes for based on those contributions. And we were going to drive these trucks around Washington, D.C. in heavily trafficked areas, and just, you know, the shit would hit the fan. I wanted to raise it to that level, at least. So that's when I really realized, okay, the US government is this giant machine, but it has agendas. And these agendas are not just coming from the government, they're coming from other groups. And that's when I think, you know, the realization really sank in.
And moving on to the COVID scam, because obviously this has woken up a lot of people to the virus existence issue. Like, obviously there's lots of new platforms, like alternative platforms, questioning the orthodoxy. I think it's actually amazing what's happened. What is your perspective of the health of this movement?
My opinion kind of waxes and wanes. It's not steady. But all in all, I feel like there's enough force and enough people who are aware enough of what happened with COVID that it's not going to go away. The awareness, the consciousness is not going to just disappear. I feel confident about that, especially if they try to pull it again with, say, another quote pandemic, another virus scam, whatever, that people are going to say, well, it's the same thing as last time. And this is what we know about last time. And people know various degrees of things. I mean, I know people who are very anti-vaccine when it comes to COVID, who would absolutely refuse to discuss whether the virus exists or not. They don't want to have anything to do with that discussion whatsoever. And my attitude is, fine, okay, you know, I'm not going to waste my time trying to pressure these people. So different people have plugged into the COVID scam at different levels with different issues. I know people, for example, who say, well, the PCR test is the root of all evil. Mm-hmm. And so they, you know, will go in and explore all of that, assuming that they assume the virus exists. So now they criticize it from that. My strategy was, starting 2 years ago, when I started writing, I mean, I wrote over maybe 300-400 articles about COVID in the past 2 years. So I would say at the beginning of a number of articles, look, I've already presented you with evidence that the virus doesn't exist. For the purpose of this article, and for the sake of argument only, I'm going to assume it does, because I want to show you what happens when you step into that bubble, that world, the internal contradictions and insanities that exist within that insane world. So that's where I'm going now. Here we go. And then I would say, let's look at the PCR test from the point of view that the virus does exist. And I would, you know, article after article pointing out the contradictions and the insanity of that. But I would keep reminding people, ultimately, we're talking about something, you know, that doesn't exist. There's no virus. So COVID is not COVID. There's no COVID. There are people who are getting sick, dying, and just like with AIDS, you have to find out what it is that's actually making people sick and killing them. And it's not one thing. And that's something I've been harping on since 1988. It's not one thing. Don't look for one thing, because people would say to me, well, if it isn't the virus, then what is it? And I'd say, there is no it. What about 5G? Maybe that's it. That's what's doing it. So I've written and talked a whole lot about that. And that was one of the main breakthroughs in writing my book on AIDS in 1988 was, I said, okay, what are the high-risk groups according to the CDC? High risk for AIDS. Okay, Africans, Haitians, blood transfusion recipients, hemophiliacs, gay men. Okay, so what's the common denominator? Collapse of the immune system. That's what they say. Okay, I'll buy that as a general term. Now, what's causing that to happen in different groups? Is it the same thing? No. And when I started to dig into that extensively, okay, let's look at the scene in Haiti. Let's look at the scene in Central Africa. Let's look at these transfusion recipients. Let's look at gay men in San Francisco, LA, New York. You know, in each one of these things, oh, so all of the so-called symptoms of AIDS can be produced in these different groups by different factors, none of which has anything to do with so-called HIV or necessarily any virus whatsoever. Aha. That's very interesting because, wow. So HIV becomes not only a lie, but a cover story. Mm. A cover story for all of these other things that are making people sick and killing them. And especially in Africa, it was very clear to me. And I've maintained that until today, and I still talk to people and write about that. The use of the virus as a cover story for crimes committed by corporations, governments, foundations with big money, past crimes, present crimes, planned future crimes. In Africa, the local governments want to maintain populations in a weakened, debilitated state because they're far easier to control and steal from. So you've got contaminated water supplies, you've got starvation, poverty, sewage running directly into the drinking water in some places, you've got stolen fertile agricultural land by major agri corporations, starvation, protein, calorie, nutrition, malnutrition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Toxic pesticides, toxic medical drugs that are shipped into the third world. These are the crimes that are all being covered up by saying, none of that is it. We have to focus on the virus is causing all of this destruction. Well, that's like an intelligence agency operation. That's like the CIA. That's like a whole other sinister thing that's going on here. And the same is true of SARS-CoV-2, swine flu, 2009, SARS 2003, West Nile. It's all the same kind of operation.
I'm glad that you're not the only one. I mean, you've had it for much longer than me, but the only one that gets but if it's not this, it must, what is it? Like you say, the one cause, it drives you insane. It would be nice if there was one reason.
They have a deep psychological need for the one. And it's not just the one virus, it's the one, you see it in many different places. So what's the answer? The answer. What's the explanation? You know, and you say, well, there's 4 things going on here. And people, you know, well, that might be too much, you know, give me the one, right? No, there isn't any one.
In your opinion too, Jon, like you've seen what happened with AIDS and obviously with SARS-CoV-2, with COVID. In your opinion, is COVID much bigger in terms of the size of the awakening versus what it was like with AIDS?
Yes, much bigger awakening, much worse situation to begin with in terms of, you know, the whole governments worldwide, the lockdowns and, you know, the vaccine, the whole deal, the mandates and all this insanity. Much worse. much worse. And the awakening is much greater than it was back in the 80s or the 90s, much greater. I mean, I see it on websites all the time, at least, some degree. Another athlete collapsed today. No explanation was given. Why not? We understand they received the vaccine 3 weeks ago, and then you get 200,000 people reading that article. And they also know that there's, 57 other athletes that collapsed in the last couple of months. What's going on, So on some levels, different levels, many more people are waking up. No question about it. And even when it comes to the non-existence of the virus, many more people are waking up. They see through it. And that's fantastic, I think, because once you abandon that, I'm not afraid of that whole thing anymore. The virus. Okay, so now what's your view of illness, medicine, health, well-being? What are you looking for now? What are you thinking about now? That sets a person on a whole new path. It also, I pointed this out many times. Well, we've been living under this system of modern medicine for over 100 years now, where it's the I as a human, you as a human, are supposedly at risk for thousands of distinct and different diseases, each one caused by a germ. Each germ must be treated with a drug and prevented with a vaccine. What's wrong with this picture, And I'll tell you something. I don't know whether I've ever mentioned this in public before, but there was a famous public health expert at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, Barbara Starfield. She wrote a report in 2000, July 26, 2000, in the Journal of the American Medical Association called, "Is U.S. Health Really the Best in the World?" And she said in her review, medical system in America kills 225,000 people a year. So you put that out to 2.25 million people a decade. And so I interviewed her years later, finally, by email. She said that was a conservative estimate. So after the interview, about a year before she died, I had an email exchange with her. And she finally wrote something like, she said, "I'm sick of all of these," I'm paraphrasing her now, "separate compartmentalized diseases or conditions of the body. When are we going to look at the body as a whole?" And this was coming from a decidedly mainstream doctor, very well respected and revered at Johns Hopkins. She could see it. There was something insane about this whole paradigm, right?
What you described, John, is exactly, like, for me, my awakening in terms of that movement of where it starts from coming from mainstream, moving all the way along. And she was right. It's subspecialized, it's reductionist. That's all that medicine can offer, and it's wrong. The COVID fraud is being used as a Trojan horse to usher in the globalist agendas. From your wider investigations into the globalists, how do you think their plans are going? Is COVID working out as they planned, or have they overreached?
I think they overreached. I think there's evidence of that because of so many people that have awakened to some degree to the scam of it all. For example, there's a lot of people now who would say, well, the lockdowns were insane. They didn't do any good, really, except my business went under. I went bankrupt. My family was almost destroyed, et cetera. And I know a lot of other people like that. I mean, there's that level too. I think it was an overreach. But I also think it's very chilling because they were able to lock down a considerable part of the planet without people just absolutely resisting and rebelling no matter what. I mean, there were major protests, not really in America, but in other countries. The protests never reached the level of outright massive rebellion, where businesses just said, you know, screw you, we're staying open. Many, many businesses, not just a few heroes. Corporations, banks, businesses, we're not going back into that. And people saying, I'm going to work, I don't care. You guys want to arrest me? That's your business, you know, until it's just overwhelming. It never got to that level. And that's disturbing to me because that gives these globalist planners hope that they can do it again on some pretext or another. You know, they can say, we have to lock down for whether it's, quote, a virus or some other reason. They have to know it's not going to work. I mean, I don't care. I mean, they could blow up the planet. Yeah. But, you know, short of that sort of thing, if the rebellion is big enough, there's no way to stop it. People are just going to go about their lives, you know. That's what I want to see. I want to feel confident about that.
I know it's speculation, but or guessing a bit, but why do you think there wasn't the response in America?
Because people are too comfortable. Even people who say, you know, I'm living on the lower end of the economic spectrum or whatever, relative to a lot of other places in the world, it's not as bad as those other places. And there's just many, many people that have basic comforts. So they're thinking, well, as long as, you know, I've got this and I can eat and get, okay, and I can get bailed out to some degree too. Now, it was very uneven in America, the money from the government, but there was a hell of a lot of it. And a lot of people did get money. And so they said, well, if I can get money for not working, am I going to go out in the streets and protest like crazy and get arrested? I don't think so. You know, so there's reasons like that. But if you try to take football away for 2 years in a row, you're going to have hell to pay, pro football, right? So 70,000 people are going to show up at a pro football game and breathe on each other and scream and cough and sneeze and get drunk and fall down. That's, you know, that's American protest, right?
I suppose as long as there's bread and circus, it's always the same. Wondered if you could talk about, for the audience that don't know about your product, the Matrix Reveal, because I think it's a really important what you've created.
Sure. People can find it on my website, nomorefakenews.com. The Matrix Reveal is a mega collection of information. And at the heart of it are hundreds of pages of interviews, for example, with an insider whom I call Ellis Medavoy. A long story how I met him, but he was basically what I would call a master propaganda operative at the highest level, who for many years was working not just for the government, but for people in groups that I would say control the government. And he had many mandates and missions and campaigns to deceive the public. He agreed finally to talk to me off the record because he was now retired and he was experiencing some remorse about what he had done. He began to talk about the basic psychology of propaganda and mind control in ways that I had never heard anybody talk about it before. And so we did many text interviews, several hundred pages worth, that to me are absolutely mind-blowing, and people who have read them and studied them have told me the same thing. In addition to that, a close friend of mine and colleague, a hypnotherapist named Jack True in Los Angeles, had stopped doing hypnosis, and he was now finding very creative ways to deal with people based on the idea of waking up their creativity and imagination in ways that were startling, and to me that were fantastic. And I interviewed him for several hundred pages. These are at the core of the Matrix Revealed, and I believe they give people a much deeper appreciation for Earth culture, what's been going on for a very long time in this world, how people are controlled at levels much deeper than we realize, and how they can reverse all of this. That was the objective. So that's basically what the Matrix Revealed is about.
I want to get it. It sounds amazing. People can find this at nomorefakenews.com.
That's right. And I'm also working now at Substack. I have a page, Jon Rappoport Substack, where I'm writing, spreading out much further and writing about the culture that we're now facing in the world, because there are so many what I would call operations going on to just completely control people, drive them crazy, and so on, agendas, that I just decided I have to write about this too. So I'm doing that as well.
What do you think is the way forward in terms of overcoming the globalist structure?
Decentralization of power along all fronts. In other words, every government in the world is too big. I don't care where it is. I could say that just across the board. Way too big. People can't connect with it, not really. They just connect with robots and people that act like robots. Too much power at the top is very dangerous, and there's more of it all the time. Got to decentralize. That means you look at a country and you say, well, there are whatever, what do we have in this country? Are they states, provinces, districts? What do they call themselves? Every one of these has some kind of a government. More power has to go down to them and less on top. And then if you look at the district governments, or say the state governments in America, they're all too big too. So they have to be decentralized. More power has to go to cities, towns, villages, those governments, to make decisions for themselves, so that people are really talking to people, hopefully, that they know. That to me is the big one. Now, we are faced with a giant issue in America right now, the abortion issue and the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which people are just screaming to the high heavens about. And, you know, okay, that requires a longer discussion. But one of the straightforward things the Supreme Court said was, this issue belongs with the individual states to decide, not the federal government. That's what our decision is all about. We're not saying we're going to ban abortion or we're not going to ban abortion. We're saying this is a wrong venue. It always was. It's up to the state governments. And people have become hysterical about that and think it means that nobody's going to be able to get an abortion. That's not true at all. And I say, good. Let's bring on the conflict. Conflict between the state governments and the federal government. Conflict between the states. That's good too. Let's have competitive states or competitive provinces. You don't like what the government is doing in one province? You move to another province where you think it's a better situation. This is what I think is the real future of politics. decentralization of power and competition among the decentralized elements.
From an individual's perspective, what do you think I know they can't fight the globalists, themselves, but what do you think from an individual perspective that people should be doing to turn things around?
I mean, aside from trying to nail down the essentials of survival, whatever you believe that entails, I'm not an expert. I know a lot of people, a few people who are, if people want to survive off the grid, fantastic. I'm not the guy to explain how to do that, but I know people who can explain it. And I think it's a great thing if you want to do it. Yeah. But what I'm mainly concerned about the individual doing is standing up for what they believe to be right and speaking out about it and saying, okay, if I do this and go to the wall with it, because we really are living in dangerous times here, requiring people to stand up for what they believe in, what are the consequences that could occur to me, that could be visited upon me? And how can I sidestep those or avoid those, or at least the bulk of them? Well, that requires thinking, planning, imagining, etc., whatever you can do. Ultimately, it requires people saying, I don't care. I'm willing to face whatever comes. And people, I don't want to think about that. Well, soon, sometime or another, you or your children will think about it, because it could come to that. So those are the things that I focus on with the individual. What do you really believe in? Are you speaking up for it no matter what? If not, your life is on hold. Your energy is is down there somewhere. You can't avail yourself of all the energy you've got, for sure, not even a fraction of it, because a lot of it depends upon your ability and willingness to say and express in public, this is what I stand for. This is what's real. This is the way it should be. Once you start doing that, all kinds of things open up to you that you wouldn't have seen before. And I'm not just talking about trouble. I mean, opportunities that you wouldn't have noticed or been aware of, where you say, wow, this is a new life. Or you can speak to that, right?
Absolutely, John. I agree. And I think it's just removing that fear from the decision that the decisions that you make, and just saying, I'm taking the fear out and just going with it anyway. But it's a step of courage, it's a leap of faith, but it brings you so much positivity and empowerment, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, John, I just thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to hear from you and connect up in person, well, in the virtual person way.
Yes, indeed. I really appreciate, having a conversation with you and being able to just, say what's on my mind here, knowing that if I were to sit here and start asking you questions now, there would be a whole fantastic story that you would have to tell as well. That would be of great interest to people. Great interest.
Well, John, I'm available anytime if you want to talk with me. I'm more than happy. I felt like I really wanted to reach out to you, because I thought you really were onto this from the beginning, from day one. And I wasn't. I was asleep, but I've woken up and I feel like I'm catching up with everything that you've done. But thank you for this opportunity, and I encourage everyone to come to your website, nomorefakenews.com.
Absolutely, and Substack as well. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work, and I'm sure we'll be talking again.
If you enjoyed this video, please visit support.drsam.com